Probably injury is the one that shapes you the most. You can spend 3 years training for an Olympics, but normally you have the cycles, you have the World Championships, and you have the Europeans in between, but you spend the full year training twice a day for something, and then just one day before your first competition or one day before the World Championship, you snap your ankle or you snap your Achilles. I think those kind of setbacks, they do build your resilience and build your toughness and your resolve to achieve what you want to achieve and be able to take a step back sometimes and say, okay, well, look, this is an occupational hazard.
That was Deirdre Ryan, Irish Olympian and advocate for a sustainable Irish food. And I'm John Lee.
And I'm Martin Nutty. Welcome to another episode of Irish Stew, the podcast for the global Irish nation.
Today's episode of Irish Stew is sponsored by OM Art, where you can find original prints, jewelry, home decor, and custom gifts featuring OM, the first written form of the Irish language. Visit omart.com, and that's OGHAMART.com, and listeners can save 20% at omart.com using coupon code IRISHSTEW. That's OGHAMART.com.
Hi, everybody. This is Martin Nutty with the Irish Stew podcast, and I'm joined by John Lee, and I hear we're going to soar to new heights today. Oh, my God, that's just a terrible whatever. Anyway, tell us about our wonderful guest, John, please.
Yeah, we're going back to Ireland for our guest today, but really we're going to talk to one of our most global of Irish Stew citizens, a world-class athlete who's competed for Ireland on a global stage, including the Olympics, making her the second Irish Olympian to join us here on Irish Stew. We'll mention the first one later on. She studied and worked in Italy, speaks Italian, trained and worked in Germany, learned German, spent time in her life in Belgium, the UK, and Switzerland. And along the way, she developed an interest in food, nutrition, and sustainability. And that made her a natural fit for Board Bia, the Irish Food Board, where she is helping Irish agriculture and food sector clear the bar to a greener future as the Director of Sustainability and Quality Assurance for Board Bia's Origin Green Initiative. Welcome, Deirdre Ryan.
Thanks, John. Some great puns there. Delighted to join you on the show.
Of course, pun is as I recall, the lowest form of humor, and we certainly seem to have achieved new lows.
Yeah.
But Deirdre, welcome to the podcast. We're delighted to have you on. And I'm going to kick this off with a very simple question. Since you work in Board Bia, and just to let our audience know, Board Bia is maybe you can explain it in better detail than I will, Deirdre, but I see it as the organization that's responsible for promoting Irish food offshore. That's the primarily goal. But the question I have for you, since you work in the food business and in Ireland, is what is your favorite Irish food?
Oh, God, I have a few, but if I have to pick one, and it changes every couple of months, but I do like a good steak once a week on a Sunday, kind of a medium rare steak, and I don't even put anything on it. I don't even bother with the pepper sauce or anything like that. And some nice spuds, roasted spuds, and then some peas with a bit of mint. That's my latest.
You are a total Irish traditionalist by the sound of things, as you know. The cow, of course, in Ireland has an extraordinarily long history. I kind of think of, the cattle raid of Cooley, or the Toyn Bow Coolinja, if you want to do in Gaelic, is, the Irish epic, the equivalent of the Iliad and the Odyssey for listeners that haven't heard that before. And it all revolves around a war over cattle. So it'll tell you something about how the old cow was that important in Irish culture from 2,000 years ago and continues to be incredibly important. Huge
tradition in Ireland of Irish farming. And they say that, farm only changes generation every, 400 years or something like that. It is. And I might give a plug to seafood as well. My other dish that I've been making lately is chopped shallots and garlic, a little bit of white wine and some Irish mussels. You're done in about five minutes and it's ready to go. So That's my other dish of choice that I've been my go-to these days.
Deirdre, it's only breakfast time for us, but you're getting my mouth watering.
I know.
Here.
Yeah, lunchtime here. Yeah, so I have food on the mind.
But let's do this. On Irish Stew, we really like kind of origin stories. You, like I, share Dublin origins, except you're still living in Dublin. I live in New York, obviously. So tell me about your Dublin origin story.
So, yeah, well, I'm a Dub. My parents aren't. So my mother is from Durrow in Laois. So good farming, dairy farming land in Laois. My dad is a Tipperary town man. And they actually met in Arklow. And yeah, my dad was teaching in Dublin. So that's where my brother and I were born. So we were born and raised in Rathfarnham, went to, a local school, Marley Grange, Divine Word, Marley Grange, a good Catholic primary school nearby. And yeah, I kind of stayed in South Dublin for a good while. Even went to University College Dublin and on the south side, but I'm currently living on the north side. I'm living in a North Strand, so near Fairview Park. So yeah, I've gone over to the north side, and there's no turning back. The beaches are better.
You've joined me on, my origin on the dark side now, north side, I'd like to talk a little bit about your athletic career. And John mentioned up front, we've already had actually an Irish track and field athlete on the podcast that competed in the Olympic Games as Paddy McGrath, as a hammer thrower and a well-known hammer coach over this side of the world in New York. In terms of Deirdre's accomplishment, I'm going to give her a shout out because she may not do that herself. Deirdre finished 6th in the World Championships in 2011 in Daegu, Korea. She holds the Irish record for the high jump at 1.95 m. For those that speak old world style, that's a shade under 6 feet 5 inches. She holds both the indoor and Irish record, which is standing over 10 years now. And actually, we'll see if anybody comes close any time in the near future. But tell me about how you got involved in the esoteric world of leaping over a bar.
Yeah, and as you speak of records, I would love my records to be broken. I hope they are sooner rather than later. It'd be great to see some Irish high jumpers reach that level, and there are a few talented girls in the country at the moment. So fingers crossed. I guess I got into high jumping. I was inspired by distance runners. Ireland has such a long history of distance runners. Sonia Sullivan, I'm sure many of your listeners will know. And I guess, Eamon Coughlin and John Tracy, and it's part of the kind of athletic culture here, and track and field events. So yeah, I know you're a hammer thrower and a shot putter and everything else. Field events probably less so. So I would have been interested in cross country running and wanted to join a local club, Dundrum, South Dublin. But I was actually too young to join at the time. I just really wanted to. I was just really loved athletics and track and field and loved watching it, and really inspired by the likes of young Sonia's, coming up through the ranks, and eventually joined by the age of, I think, 8 or something like that. But to be honest, I was terrible at distance running. I have no aerobic capacity whatsoever. So it was torturous. I'd be trailing in last a lot of the time. And the cross country days, those freezing cold Irish days when you're, running through fields and ditches and through the mud. So I kept doing it, but I wouldn't have been I'd have done okay, but that was for effort and not really for talent. But then Lucy Moore, a coach of mine, who was my coach for many years in Dundrum, South Dublin, introduced me to high jumping. I'm quite tall. I'm 6 foot tall. So a lot of people think that high jumpers are just tall. It requires a lot more. You find a lot of tall people that don't have the coordination, but it seemed to kind of, click with me. Field events, technical events, more so than jumping events. So yeah, I got into it then, probably later than most in other European countries. High jump is quite, you have some fantastic, Sean T, Howard or Lowy in the States, and you had Amy Acuff. So there's been quite a few in recent years, Americans, but it's traditionally Eastern European, where you find very talented high jumpers. And they would start a lot younger. So I guess I was about 14, 15 when I got into it, and then kind of kicked off from there for many years then.
Deirdre, I've got a basic question about the high jump. I'm old enough to remember when high jumpers went over the bar belly first, which we would have called, I think we called it the Western roll. It might have actually been called a straddle technique. 1968 Olympics in Mexico, one of the biggest stories was Dick Fosbury, the Fosbury flop, where he would go over the board, over the bar backwards, as you do today. As many times as I watch that, as many times as I see someone do that in slow motion, I can't quite figure out what's going on. Could you take us through it?
Sure. Yeah. And the other approaches were like the scissors jump, where you kind of, if you can kind of picture jumping up straight and scissoring your legs over something, it's hard to kind of picture for people listening and not watching, but that's kind of one of the original ways. And then there was this kind of, I think it was the roll, where you kind of roll over it forward. But the Fosbury flop, and the flop is, I mean, it gives you huge more potential to gain height. Because you can lift your center of gravity that bit higher if you have the flexibility to go over backwards. So essentially what you try and do when you're jumping is you kind of run on, if you can picture a J shape almost as you're running up to the bar, and the angle and the curve kind of gives you the ability to kind of propel yourself kind of forward over the bar, but gain height. So running the curve is really important. And it can be quite difficult on your ankles, as you can imagine, the twisting of your knees and your ankles on takeoff. So you're kind of taking off at that angle. So what you're really trying to do is reach up as high as you can with your arms, and you drive your knee forward. And if you can kind of picture then pushing your hips over your knee, you can kind of go into this arching position that gives you the ability to kind of gain huge more height as well over the bar. So yeah, it's hard to kind of, when you do it the first time, it just like anything, it takes what do they say? I don't know, 10,000 hours, if not more, of practice to perfect something really well. So you see kids, it's interesting watching kids as they kind of get there, and progress the more they develop the technique. But yeah, it's kind of all physics really, it's just power weight ratio and power over a curve. And, it's biomechanics and physics really. That kind of.
Fosbury was a civil engineer by training, although I think he sort of applied the engineering, the mathematics after the fact. I think he sort of found his way.
He just felt it.
As I looked into this, have you ever come across a Canadian high jumper at that time named Debbie Brill?
No, I didn't. There was another Canadian high jumper at the time, but I just think that name rings a bell. Maybe she was just a bit before my time.
Well, she would have been a contemporary of Fosbury's, a little bit younger.
Right,
and apparently she developed the technique independently. It was called the Brill Bend.
I've heard of her. Sorry, I have. That's what I've heard of her from. Yeah. Apparently, she was developing at the same time. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. It's one of those things you often see even in like kind of motivational speeches around, rethinking things and things being done the same way for so long, and then how they really just change completely by virtue of one person making some sort of discovery, which is interesting in the sporting world.
I know Ireland doesn't have a huge tradition in high jumping. And as I understand it from your career, in order to kind of progress at a certain point in time, you had to leave Ireland to take it to the next level. And I understand you fetched up in Germany. Can you take us through that, exactly how that developed, and how did that kind of, change your view of the sport? And also, once you leave Ireland, you tend to look at the country a little bit differently.
Yeah, that's true. I think actually, and you see that in a lot of cultures and countries. Sometimes when people go abroad, they almost become more traditional in many ways, and they really hold on to their roots and things like that. So I often find that with a lot of people that go abroad. Probably wasn't my case for the first few years, but you definitely do look back and look at things differently, and miss the good bits and wish that the bad bits could improve better. But going back to your first question around leaving, I had come to a point where I felt that I couldn't improve much further in Ireland. And, that would have been something that I would have talked and discussed with my coach at the time, who I guess I was her first her first high performance athlete. And, we still have a great relationship now, Lucy Moore, but, we both kind of felt, and maybe me more so than her initially, which is always a difficult decision to make, to leave a long-term coach, and almost like a big breakup. But that I needed more kind of attention, more technical expertise. The facilities in the country at the time weren't what they are now. So even a place to jump, I know in University College Dublin, there was a mat that I used to train on, and it was burnt down. And they bought a new one, and that one was burnt. And, so like, not by wanting trying in that particular instance, but that's painting a terrible picture of Ireland. Was a very unusual incident. But anyway, so, I didn't have a place to jump. So I was traveling across the city to kind of get a facility to jump in. And the facility that was there was very narrow. I couldn't do my full run up and everything like that. So it was just a little bit of a challenge. And I also maybe felt that I wanted some new inspiration and motivation. So I had been trying for a number of years to find a coaching system that would, adopt me, for want of a better word. And I think, when you get to that level, I was already competing at a particularly like a high-ish level, so it wasn't, then there's kind of national interest at heart. Other countries and other coaches, other national teams might not want to take on a competing nations team or, competitors. So it can be difficult to find a group. So I did kind of, print out the top 50 list and start calling federations and coaches and saying, does anyone need a training partner? And I had been looking around for a while. I had trained with a Belgian coach for a while, but that didn't work out. They had very different kind of training methods, and it just didn't work for me. And then I found a coach in Germany. I was trying to qualify for a world championship, so I kind of asked my boss for a few weeks annual leave, and I was just, frantically running around Europe trying to get competitions to make this qualification. And I ended up in a place called Bayer Leverkusen in Germany. You probably know it from, the football team, and Bayer pharmaceutical facility. They actually fund a lot of the athletes in that region. So I was doing a competition there, and I just saw these incredible facilities, and just, it's like a playground for athletes, all these exercise things you could, utilize, the gym facilities, the medical facilities, and everything else. So, I kind of took it upon myself to befriend one of the coaches there, and, tried to see if he would, take me on as an athlete. There was a girl there at the time who was training, and she needed a training partner. So they eventually agreed to let me compete for Bayer Leverkusen as well as for Ireland. And, I could do regional competitions for them. Okay, I couldn't do nationals for Germany, obviously, but so I was allowed to train there, and I had a fabulous coach called Gert Ozenberg. He would have coached many of the greats. He was retired really at the time, but he was coaching me and a triple jumper from Grenada who had a similar experience, was on his way to Latvia from America and ended up in Leverkusen and never left. And he's actually still there. So Gert was obviously taking in a few strays at the time. And we competed there with a few of the other German athletes. And we had a fabulous experience. It was good to, it was good to be forced to learn another language as well. Like, that's something that I never would have done otherwise. German, I prefer like Latin languages, but it has helped me since then. I got a really great job in the retailer Lidl as their head of sustainability years later. And one of the prerequisites was that you spoke German. So it did help. And, it's always good for traveling. And I've made some fabulous friends there. And I think just living abroad, it just opens your mind in many ways that you don't even realize when you are abroad. And then even when you come back, you see different ways. So I just think, traveling and having to be abroad didn't seem like a burden on me, that I had to leave Ireland to jump better or anything like that. It was a really exciting time, an exciting experience. And, my coach only really spoke German, so we didn't have much choice. A bit like being in the Gaeltacht in Ireland, for your listeners who don't know what that is. When you're in school in Ireland and you have to, you have to learn Irish for your exams. You go off to the Gaeltacht for 3 weeks and speak only Irish, and it's total immersion, and you just learn it. So it was a similar experience in German where I just had to learn it, and now it's I've probably forgotten a lot of it, but it was good to have.
Yeah, if you don't use it, you lose it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it comes back, I think, with practice. And just one other thought on the world of high jumping. As I understand it, and pretty much, any high jump competition I watch, ultimately, it ends up in failure, even for the winner,
Yeah.
which is kind of an oddity, when you compare it to some of the other events. Because, you keep jumping and jumping and jumping until you can go as high as possible. And then eventually, you can't jump any higher and the bar comes down. How does that experience shape you as a person and now as a business person? Because you're dealing constantly with failure in a way, right? Do you ever think about that as being kind of like a very odd sporting experience?
Yeah, it is actually interesting, isn't it? High jump and pole vault are really the only two events where you always end on failure. And I think even, apart from looking at the failure bit, but also when you're about to jump a bar, that you've never jumped that high before. So you're about to do something that you've never done before and you've never achieved before. Whereas in something like long jump or sprint, you just run as fast as you can, jump and hope that you did better than before. So that's why it's such a mental event, and it does require that kind of mental toughness and resilience, I think, compared to the other events in many ways. But I think even beyond that, just the challenges of sport and how they shape you. I think probably injury is the one that shapes you the most. So you can spend 3 years training for an Olympics, but normally you have the cycles, you have the world championships in between, you have the Europeans in between, but you spend the full year training twice a day for something. And then, just one day before your first competition or one day before the world championship, you snap your ankle or you snap your Achilles, and I think, that those kind of setbacks they do build your resilience and build your toughness and your resolve to achieve what you want to achieve, and be able to kind of take a step back sometimes and say, okay, well, look, this is an occupational hazard. This is what happens in sport, and onwards and upwards. And you become very solutions oriented. As soon as you get injured, you kind of, you might get upset for a day or two, but then, your mind has to shift into mode of how do I get better? What do I eat? What do I do? What can I do when I'm injured? What doctors can I see? That kind of solutions focus, and how can I make this injury better for something, to have been worthwhile, and do something different and do something, take a step back and change your system. So, I think that all those kind of areas and things are, I think sport shapes you in so many ways that, I don't think I'd be the person at all. I think I'd be a totally different person if it wasn't for sport. I might be a better person. I might be a more fun person. I might be many different things. I don't know, but maybe I wouldn't be as hard on myself, or maybe I wouldn't be, as dogged or something. But it definitely shapes who you are in a huge way, as would, loads of other things in life that happen to people. I mean, I often think about it when you definitely do build resilience. It's not like when you get injured, you lose something or someone, so it's not like this huge traumatic life thing that grief can be, but it builds kind of day on day resilience in a way, that kind of process oriented day on day type of, okay, small setback, let's keep going kind of thing that does kind of translate itself to kind of those work environments quite well. They're quite similar. It's not like world changing stuff, but yeah, it's a mindset that does fit, I think, quite well with the work environment, that you kind of, you take things that, maybe other people might take really seriously or really get really upset about and, get frustrated with. And not that I don't get frustrated, but you kind of move on and kind of keep going and get solutions oriented as well. There's so many other, I suppose, aspects to sport though that translate to life, and, team building and your network and always having to motivate yourself and motivate others. So yeah, sport is just, I'm really passionate about my work and that I do now. But I think, if I were to ever have kids, or, any of my friends that have kids, I'm just always trying to get them to have their kids involved in sport, I think, or something, or just have an interest, as they grow up, be it music or, just to strive to achieve something and to be dedicated to something and learn something about themselves as they go through that kind of process of doing well, not doing well, figuring out how to do well,
Deirdre, before we get into your business career that culminates now with Board Bia, one more stop on your athletic trail. You were talking just recently about injuries and ankles. I know you had an ankle injury in the run up to the Olympic Games in London, but what was that like? Just from a kind of an emotional feeling. Did you walk in with the team at the opening ceremonies? What was it like to be in the Olympics?
Yeah, it was definitely a surreal experience. I think, you think when you're doing World Championships and Europeans that they're kind of the same, like the World Championships is essentially the same thing. You're competing with the best in the world. But I think because the Olympics has such a buzz about it, such a hype about it, and your family and your friends really understand it more so than they do World Championships, it does add an extra, and the multi-sport aspect to it and the village. And, so it's just a really exhilarating, exciting buzz of an experience. That, it's just the big show on earth, for that day, but, at the same time, when you're like harboring an injury, it can be stressful as well. Like I didn't go to the opening ceremony. I went to the closing. I was back at the time. I had a bit of ankle as well, but I had a bulging kind of disc in my back, and quite a few kind of ankle injuries. My best year was probably 2011 and 2012. The body just started to break down quite a bit, but it's a weird. I think athletes just sometimes have a very strange mentality. You're injured, you're quite injured and you're quite stressed, but at the same time you fully believe that you can go out there and despite all that, make the final, and who knows, this great story where you make the 11th. So you've kind of got it's this almost like contradiction within your own brain of like, I'm stressed, I know I'm stressed and I'm injured, but at the same time I still believe that this is possible and it's going to happen. And then you're really disappointed, even though it was really obviously not going to be the success that you thought it would be. So you're almost a contradiction in yourself at times. But I guess I one of the experiences I do remember is meeting a friend of mine after I competed, and I was quite upset. It hadn't worked out as the fairy tale story, coming back from injury, everything else, and she was a pole vaulter from Iceland who was also trained in Leverkusen, and she was a mentor to the Icelandic team. And she was just like, Deirdre, like 99.9% of people in this village are disappointed. You need to take an hour and you need to get over it. You need to get down to the track. You need to cheer your team on. You need to go see Katie Taylor win her medal. You need to go soak it all up, because you'll regret it if you don't. And, I'm so glad I did, and just kind of almost like got over yourself and kind of be disappointed in 2 weeks' time and figure out the solutions. But for now, just try and enjoy this experience. Like at the time, of course, I thought I was going to go to Rio. I never really recovered. I tried the year after, but, I think 2011 was really my year. 2012 was just the start of the end, but you don't think it is at the time. So you do think you'll have Rio and you'll make a comeback. But, I did really enjoy it then after, and just tried to take in the experience. So it's very grateful to have had that opportunity, to have had that career, to have had the people that supported me, my parents, my coaches, my friends and family, and, and the, sponsors and sports council and everything, that sponsored and funded, some elements of it as well. So, I was very grateful to have that.
Well, it sounded like, the origins of your move towards Origin Green from things I've read came during your athletic career when you were in Germany, and you started to you picked up on the nutritional focus of the German athletes, what this food really is, where it comes from. And if I understand that correctly, that was the seed for your path towards sustainability.
Yeah, indeed. I think, it was just that. And a lot of athletes just take a really keen and have to take a really keen focus on on their diet, and the provenance of food, how it's grown. And I think just the importance of food, and God, now more than ever, when we see what's happened in Ukraine and Russia, and, you know, food prices and everything, you know, and how we are all so affected by, you know, food systems, you know, and the atrocities that have gone on there, and how we're so affected by, you know, climate change and our food system, and how fragile and important it is. So yeah, I think just, you know, as you said, it was the seed of just nutrition, and how important it is just to look after our body and eat good food, and understand, you know, it's the fuel you put in an engine, and, you know, you're trying to drive a race car when you're an athlete. So I also think that at the time, Germany was probably more, you know, they were more interested in, you know, the kind of sustainability was more to the forefront of the German consumer than the Irish consumer. So that interested me a lot. And I met colleagues now who I work with now, who were in the German office of the Irish Food Board over there. And I just thought it was amazing that, like, these people are out there, you know, putting the Irish jersey on, and, you know, talking about the great provenance and great food we have in Ireland, and there they are in the German office. And, you know, so I always had kind of Board BIA and, you know, that mission of what they do at the back of my mind. So when I retired, you know, I saw this course that they were offering around, you know, going back to study again. I'd done business studies and languages, international business. So similar, you know, I'd done a lot of related stuff that we do now in terms of marketing comms and business development and stuff. But my interest is really in sustainability then. So I went back to do a master's in sustainability in Smurfit Business School, again, which is UCD. But it's funded by the Irish Food Board, who I work for now. So you do a 2-year program whereby you do your master's, but you also go on placements with different companies. So you spend, you know, I spent 8 months actually in Nestle in Switzerland. And then you spend, you know, I spent 6 months back in Dusseldorf in Germany working for Metro Group. And then I worked with Subway. So it was exciting because I was learning new stuff. I was traveling. I was always, you know, on the move, which I was used to from being an athlete. And it was kind of, it was just a new beginning. So that's kind of where it all started, that 2-year program, which was, it was a real game changer, I think, for me, and kind of eased me back into the world. I think if I'd gone from, I used to always work when I was competing, but I was working maybe, you know, flexibly, remotely, a bit like we are now. And, you know, I could work a couple of days a week, maybe 4 days, depending on my schedule for athletics. So working very flexibly, like, wasn't really my priority, if we're honest. You know, my priority was sport. But when I retired, then it was kind of like, what am I going to do now? So that was a nice transition piece. And I wasn't sitting, you know, in an office. I was up, I was on the go, I was doing different things. I was studying as well as working. So had that variety that I was looking for. So it probably wasn't until 2 years later that I kind of, you know, only dawned on me, okay, I've actually retired now, and there's no going back. I just busied myself with something else.
So talk to me a bit about your current position and sustainability. You know, we toss these words around, sustainability. Why should anybody give a darn about sustainability, and how does that relate to food?
Yeah, so food sustainability, I mean, food is just, as we were speaking about earlier, it's hugely important to every single person on the planet, but it's also, you know, it can be a huge contributor to greenhouse gas emissions and to climate change, but we all need food. So it can contribute to up to, you know, I mean, even in Ireland, about 37% of emissions come from agriculture, because we're an agricultural producing nation. So the more sustainably we produce it, which we do here in Ireland comparatively, the better. And so I think from a, you know, even a consumer or customer perspective, you know, being conscious of what we eat, how we eat, is essential. The program we run here is called the Origin Green program. So it was established kind of based on we had quality assurance programs in place about 20 years ago. And we developed those quality assurance systems into sustainability programs. So on farm level, we work with 55,000 farmers. who we audit every 18 months on their quality assurance, but also their environmental performance on various different areas. We carbon footprint all the farms, give them feedback reports, work with, advisory as well in partner agencies to support, the improvement of farm practice so that we can assure customers globally that when they buy from Ireland, it's produced in a sustainable fashion from farmers who are making improvements all the time. The company side, so it's a farm to fork program. It's across all sectors, from farm to fork, from even retail to manufacturing. On the manufacturing side, we have a lot of big companies who export. We export about 90% of what we produce in Ireland. So they develop sustainability plans, so 5-year sustainability plans, again, looking at social sustainability, environmental sustainability, and we audit them then every year. So they develop a 5-year plan, and every year they come in they give us all their data, and we do an audit to make sure they're progressing. And then similarly with the retailers here in Ireland, we do the same thing. They develop sustainability programs and we audit them so we can assure customers, globally. But I think there's a growing interest, I think, from global customers and consumers around sustainability. Different aspects are more important in different markets. So the American consumer is very different to the Swedish consumer. But by and large, there's growing interest in from a consumer perspective. But from a legislative perspective, there's massive targets that we all need to reach in Europe. We have the European Green Deal. And actually more specific to the agricultural sector, we have the farm to fork strategy. So that's really charting the recovery from recession, from COVID and from COVID-19 and just the economic resilience into the future on sustainability, so green recovery and so on. So the farm to fork strategy from EU then will be taken up by the various member states, but we also have targets in place that we need to meet around greenhouse gas emissions and biodiversity. So, future proofing from a nature perspective as well. So yeah, it's a huge challenge, from an environmental perspective, but we are at an advantage here in Ireland, I suppose, and have made a good start already. But yeah, I don't know in New York, how's the consumer?
I think you're ahead of us, and certainly particularly in the agricultural sector, applying some standards across agriculture. We're way, way, way far from that here. And one thing I mentioned to you, Deirdre, I had done a bit of work for Board B a few years ago on a PR project, a brief public relations project they had here, and one of the elements was the grass-fed standard, and this is. What is it that makes the cattle, the dairy, or the beef grass-fed? And it sort of underlines that there's a lot of terminology that's just sort of slapped onto things that they don't mean anything, like hypoallergenic. What does that mean? So I think what really came across for me in that particular program and other things I learned about Origin Green is it's a very rigorous program. There's a lot of data collection. There's a lot of data analysis. And my understanding was kind of independent third-party inspection and judges of the progress of these farms and letting them know where they fall short and what they have to improve. So it's not just a nice greenwashing label you're putting on things. There's some real rigorous data science behind it.
Absolutely. I think that's and it's still actually the only national sustainability program that goes from farm to fork, so across all the sectors, that's independently verified. So it was set up about 10 years ago. So we're still up there and making improvements all the time. But the independent verification piece is really important, that we say what we do what we say, we stand over everything and, everything's independently audited and the data collection piece is there. And it can be a challenge, particularly, our horticulture scheme, the auditors could be there for 7-8 hours. They could be there for 2 days, sometimes when needed. So there's a lot of effort that goes into the program, as you say, from both the dairy and the beef perspective. We have great advantages from its grass-fed production system. On average, 240 days a year, cows are grazing in the country. So there's less feed being utilised. Particularly there's a lot of issues around feed and deforestation and the carbon footprint attached to them. So they will be supplemented, but by and large, it's grass-based systems. So that does make it a more extensive. It's not intensive agriculture; it's very extensive agriculture. There's lower stocking rates. So the smaller family farms might have increased slightly in the last few years, but they're small farming systems, traditional farming systems. But having said that, making huge strides on the technologies that are now available as well. So yeah, there's a lot to do, when you look at the climate agenda, but we are certainly, at an advantage, as you said.
It's funny when you mentioned, and I read that, there's something like 55,000 farms that are registered and involved in the Origin Green program, which kind of got me thinking, well, how many farms are there actually in Ireland? Which I think is in the range of about 135,000, which kind of blew me away because Ireland is not a huge country. It's only got maybe 6 million people total if you look at the whole island of Ireland. And then my background, my family background, actually, we were in the horticulture business, specifically nursery ornamental plants. And I grew up in an era, my father actually worked for what is now Tagus, which was on Forest Tuluntas back then. And in that era, when he was operating in the 50s and 60s, there was a lot of talk about the Green Revolution, meaning a lot of, better plant selection, but also accompanied by more fertilizer, more insecticide, more herbicide. And it strikes me right now, not just in Ireland, but certainly in Ireland, that there is this huge transition going underway from this kind of intensive farming towards a more organic approach, I think, might be the best way of describing it. And I wonder, is that your read? Is this a new revolution? So people talk about the Green Revolution, but now it seems to be we have to go to a sustainability revolution because we don't. We have enormous problems barreling down the pike on us. But there must be huge tension. Anytime there's a big transition like that, there's a huge tension, especially for producers.
Yeah.
And to what degree do you guys kind of step in and get involved and kind of smooth the way?
Yeah, and just as you mentioned, Teagasc, we work really closely with Teagasc. They're the in charge of the agricultural research and knowledge transfer. So, any research they do, how they transfer that knowledge to farmers as well. So, yeah, they're a partner agency of ours and the Department of Agriculture. So, and we'll be working with them more intensively now as well. But yeah, I think farmers are feeling like that they're feeling like put upon, that, all of a sudden agriculture and, meat and dairy, and ruminants generally are being criticized for their greenhouse gas emissions when, during COVID or previous years, it was like, all about food and getting food security and getting food to people and everything else. And yeah, I think there's a sense now that, in the last maybe 10 years, a realization of emissions that can come from food. People always knew that there was emissions coming from manufacturing, coming from driving cars, coming from planes, coming from, just wearing clothes and the manufacturing of textiles. So I think, now that there's a lot of talk around agriculture and emissions, it's quite a change and it's a difficult time, I think, for many farmers. It's important, I think, that Borbia and that other organizations and people understand, yes, the importance of sustainability and good food, but I guess the wider contribution of the farming sector. So it is definitely that time of tension. You do feel that. There is also that feeling of opportunity that comes with sustainability. And, particularly, I think, in Ireland, when we know that, sustainable, we produce sustainable food and the world needs more sustainable food. So, and I think, when we go abroad, particularly we compare ourselves to other countries, you almost, we need to bring that message back home and say, but look, everyone's like wants what we have here. But there is the realization that there has to be a lot of change over the next coming years. We have to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions as per the targets set out by the government here and the EU by 25% by 2030. So that's going to change the way we farm, and that's going to change how we manufacture food and drink, and it's going to change how people, so that's the target for agriculture, but we need to be climate neutral by 2050. And we have to have our carbon emissions, so 51% by 2030. So that's going to change how we live, how everyone lives their life. And we all just need to take responsibility for that as well. So yeah, this change, definitely the green revolution, as you say, is well and truly arrived. But, I think there, farmers are up for the challenge, but need more supports. They do need to know exactly what it is they're being asked to do. There needs to be more incentives for farmers. I think consumers need to pay more for food, realize that we do need to pay more for food. What's the true cost of food? And governments need to, the government needs to incentivize sustainability as well through the various mechanisms like they've climate, caps and eco schemes and things like that are rolling out. So it's a complex challenge, and multifaceted solutions are needed.
Well, Deirdre, we're talking about the Board B Origin Green and the food industry of Ireland, mostly in terms of sustainability. There's another aspect of this. It tastes great. The food in Ireland is great, and that wasn't the previous reputation of Ireland. But I'd like to just relate a story. I think I've told it on Irish Stew before. But my wife is from Italy, not far from Milan. She taught me that you did salto in alto. Is that the high jump in Italian?
Bravo.
Okay. So, she's from northern Italy. She grew up with all the great food. His mother made the pasta, someone showed up with the pheasant they had gotten, So it was all very fresh, very natural. And when we took our first trip to Ireland, she was a little on the fence about, okay, I guess fish and chips for the next 10 days. She was so impressed by the food. I mean, it was every place we went. It wasn't elaborate. It wasn't, Michelin French dining. It was all good. It was well prepared and fresh.
Yeah, wonderful produce we have. Yeah, so
and
true.
So that makes what you're doing with Origin Green really a part of the tourism mix of Ireland. It's drawing people to Ireland in a new and different way.
Yeah, it is, and it's all about that kind of natural food. Not over-engineered, just natural produce. Well produced, good stewards of the land, and happy animals, when you think about it, when you put it down to its simplest form, I think having that grass-based system is conducive to that animal welfare piece as well. So yeah, certainly there's so many facets to it, but we absolutely, it's a privilege to be, part of an organization whose job is to, go and market that great produce that we have. And yeah, it's good to hear that the Italians are impressed too.
And I know Kerrygold has been a calling card over here, and it's I think it's become success. Just about the biggest seller, and it's more expensive. And people, that was one of the Dan Barber when I was helping organize this program with Tara McCarthy, your former CEO, and Dan Barber, a famous sustainability-oriented chef here. And he, just went on about Irish butter, how good it was, how it just, was unlike any other butter.
Yeah, indeed. And even living, I think the second biggest market for Irish butter is Germany. And yeah, every time I went to anyone who I say from Ireland, they just say Kerrygold and Irish butter. Whereas, when you're in Italy, it's the drinks industry, which is another huge success, the whiskey and the Guinness that they remember. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Just thinking about, you use the word engineering or over-engineering food. There is another emerging trend in the world. We could call it many different things, but I've been reading a little bit about the notion of precision fermentation, where people are now trying to generate protein-based foods. Think of Beyond Meat or something like that, well-known emerging brand in the United States, which is kind of like a meat based on vegetarian inputs. This particular new industry seems like it's going to grow. And a lot of people are positioning these manufactured foods as being a solution to sustainability problems, because you don't have, let's say, the methane emissions that you have from a large, cattle herd, etc. And a lot of people make the case that we can generate protein a lot cheaper by kind of taking a chemistry-based approach to this. What are the consequences for Ireland? It's a big question. And
yeah, we're actually doing, Martin, big piece of research at the moment on plant-based and seeing where it's going and trying to understand what those, mega trends are, just so that our companies and our industry is prepared for what, because ultimately we respond to consumers and customers and what they want and need, and obviously we focus on what we do well, and we have huge comparative advantage in terms of our systems here, but we certainly want to keep ahead of any of those trends. We haven't, like, while those markets are growing, we haven't seen a decrease, in the consumption of the areas that we are focused on. So, but it'll be interesting to see what this new piece of research showcases as well. And there's so many of the different alternatives that I think the key thing is just to, from a consumer perspective, just to be mindful of the nutrients. And sometimes you see these plant-based proteins, but just have a million other ingredients. Going back to putting my athletic hat on, I used to always just think simple. Just if it's simple ingredients, fewer. So you don't want. But there are some brilliant products out there. A lot of our companies, we do have a lot of plant-based companies as well. But we would, even in terms of the health and nutrition, the focus on health and nutrition, and the cleanness of those ingredients is going to be really important as well. That there's not loads of additives, there's not loads of sugars, salts, hidden things, and things like that. So it's certainly we're food industry for all foods, and keep an eye on all those trends. But there's no major alarm bells, I would say, in terms of dairy, price of dairy or meat or anything like that disappearing. But I'm sure there will be trends where people, particularly in certain countries, that things become more of a delicacy, and premiumized, and that's where we would be positioning ourselves. Is like, if you're only eating meat that little bit less, then eat good quality, grass-fed Irish beef. And I don't eat meat every day either, or dairy. It's if you follow the nutritional guidelines, it's portions, whatever. I don't know what it is. I don't understand, but a palm of meat 3-4 times a week, and those areas. So I think there's room for us all, particularly given the global population growth and the way it is. But it's certainly the premium market that we're going after, and that's the ambition of the Irish Food Board, is to premiumize, to add value, back home, and to go after premium markets. And sustainability gives you that access, while consumers aren't necessarily going to always pay more. It gives you access to the best customers and the best markets around the world if you do have sustainable food.
I'm just thinking, my own feeling is one of the things I enjoy about traveling to Ireland is the opportunity to eat unique foods. And I'm thinking of these PGI and PDO designations where you talk about things like Clare Island salmon or Connemara hill lamb, etc. It seems to me that there's real opportunities making Ireland a food tourism destination now that just didn't exist when I was living in Ireland in the 1980s. As John alluded to earlier, Ireland was not known as a food destination. Does Board BIA kind of work with Tourism Ireland now? Are you guys hooking things together to kind of push that angle?
Yeah, I think there probably is more opportunity there, though. Yeah, to collaborate more with Tourism Ireland and things like that. Now, it wouldn't be my area. We're kind of the marketing team, but I guess we're probably more export oriented and focused because we're exporting. They're kind of bringing people in. So, but there's definitely, crossovers in terms of, that what we call food brand Ireland, and they have brand Ireland. So there's, even in terms of look and feel of how we advertise. So I would think my head of marketing colleague would agree with you on that one. But it is something that we, would talk about, or that they would talk about, the Irish food in Ireland when they're trying to bring people, encourage people to Ireland. Food is a really important element of that. So there'll be different events and embassies and things, events that we would collaborate on. And, a lot of our international offices, they would be state agency offices where they would all collaborate and be in what they call an Ireland house. So Enterprise Ireland and Board Bia and all those agencies would co-locate as well.
Yeah, I feel like I have to give a shout out to Imokilly Regato, or Sneem Black Pudding, or Timoleague Brown Pudding. There's all these kind of cool products, when I was getting ready to talk about Ireland and food. I'm like, oh man, I got to get on a road trip and start hitting all these things because it looks really good.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, we are hoping to get PGI status for Irish beef. Because of its grass fed, it's grass fed and the quality credentials that come with Irish beef. So we're waiting on the EU Commission approval for that. So that would be great.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for leaving us with a future-oriented note, Deirdre. We come to the point of the program where we ask you to promote something that you'd like people to know more about. I think you've been doing it about Origin Green, but we call this segment the Shameless Plug. So it's your chance to make a shameless plug on behalf of what's ever top of mind for you.
Oh, great. Well, it does. It has to be Origin Green, our national food sustainability program here in Ireland. So yeah, I guess just shout out for all our 55,000 members and 300 food companies who are making improvements in sustainability is my shout out for today.
Well, Deirdre, somebody who is used to striving for lofty goals in the athletic arena, and now for Irish food through Board Bia and Origin Green, and for helping keep Ireland the Emerald Isle through her efforts and the efforts of many of her colleagues. So, Deirdre, great to talk to you. Great to get to know you. Much appreciate your time.
Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Hey, folks, we hope you enjoyed that conversation with Deirdre Ryan. It certainly was an opportunity for me to think back on my own athletic career, as undistinguished as it may have been in comparison to Deirdre. And I'm going to chat with John in a second, but first of all, once a month, we send out an email to listeners that sign up for our mail list on our website. If you haven't done that already, you can find it at irishstewpodcast.com, and you'll see a little area where you can input your name and your email address. So we hope you do so, and we'll keep you posted on all the cool things that are happening on Irish Stew. And with that, I will bring in Mr. John Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Martin Nutty. My take on this interview, Martin, is we have got to stop having such accomplished guests. They are really making me feel bad. I mean, Deirdre, top colleges, multilingual, international business career, world-class athletics career, in the Olympic spotlight. And now she's on the world stage again in a very important role, positioning the bounty of Irish agriculture as not only nutritious and delicious, but sustainably produced in her leadership role with the Origin Green initiative of Board Bia. She was just lovely to talk to and very engaging spokesperson for Irish food. She's a woman always on the move, but we thank her for making time for Irish Stew.
Yeah, it's not often you get to talk to somebody that has been both so accomplished as an athlete and then moving on to a successful professional career.
which got me thinking a little bit about that transition, because sometimes that can be difficult. But one of the things that Deirdre mentioned was the resilience that being an athlete builds into your character. So a lot of times struggling through injury and still showing up on the day, despite the fact that things are maybe not optimal, but keep on trying, keep on trying. You know what they say? 50% of success is simply showing up. Mm-hmm. And Deirdre Ryan certainly did a lot more than show up. She's a truly accomplished person.
She showed up for us here on Irish Stew.
Irish Stew is produced by John Lee, Martin Nutty, and Bill Schultz. Editing, mixing, and mastering by Bill Schultz. Music on Irish Stew was composed and performed by Rosa Nutty, with Donald Bowens on drums, Cathal O'Riordan on bass and synthesizer. For more on Rosa Nutty's music, please visit rosanutty.com.